Hello, and welcome to the 404 Media Podcast, where we bring you unparalleled access to hidden worlds both online and IRL. 404 Media is a journalist-founded company and needs your support to subscribe. Go to 404media.co. As well as bonus content every single week, subscribers also get access to additional episodes where we respond to their best comments. Gain access to that content at 404media.co. I'm your host, Joseph, and with me 404 Media co-founders Sam Cole.
Hello.
Emmanuel Mayberg.
Hello.
And Jason Kebler.
What's up? We have new hats. We got yet another round of hats. Green hats back in stock. If you want them.
They're going to go out of stock immediately now that we've announced it on the podcast.
People love the green hats. They go out really fast.
This goes to paid subscribers today, which is Tuesday. Free listeners get it on Wednesday. So obviously paid subscribers get, they get it early, essentially. But go check the store if you want one, I guess.
We got enough this time that we shouldn't sell out in one day like we did last time, unless we're even more popular than I thought, which thank you if we are, but we should be good.
That would be a good problem to have, for sure.
Emmanuel still doesn't have a green hat, though.
I would rather our loyal fans have them first, but I'm looking forward to mine.
I don't believe you at all. You're lying through your teeth. All right. This week, we're doing something a little bit different, kind of like the episode we did last week where the entire show was about John Deere and different aspects there. What we're going to do here is talk about a topic I'm obsessed with. I've covered for years and years and years at this point, and we broke some news about, but there's so much to talk about that I don't think people are aware of, and that is SS7. Before we get into the details, the brief line and what the news is that we'll talk about in the second half of the show is that a US official from a cybersecurity agency basically broke ranks with their agency and revealed that there have been SS7 attacks to geolocate phones in the US in recent years. We'll get into the particulars of that in a little bit. But to give some context and build up to that, SS7, if you haven't heard of it, is a network and a protocol which is used when consumers roam outside of their normal provider's coverage area. So maybe you use T-Mobile or something normally, you go to a different country, you're then using SS7 or something like that, maybe an equivalent, to continue to get cell coverage, to get messages, all of that sort of thing. But crucially, it's also exploited by governments and spy firms and criminals to track people's physical location, intercept phone calls and text messages. And it's a massive problem, and it's a massive spying capability. It was designed in the 1980s, which is why it's such an issue. The way that phones work is that they're always connecting to a cell phone tower, so they always know, the telecoms always know where you are because they have to route messages to you. And that has the flip side of, well, if someone can get access to SS7, then they're going to potentially be able to track your location or anything like that. Emmanuel, you were helping me prepare for this episode. Was there just anything you wanted to say on how old the technology is and why you think that's important? Or
well, I was just telling you before we started recording that I've edited you and our former colleague Lorenzo on SS7 several times. I'm sure Jason has as well. And every time you file one of these stories, I do the same thing, which is let me Google SS7 real quick and see what it is. Jason, I don't know if you've done that. And I'm like, okay, I'll just read, a Wikipedia entry and figure it out. And it's very complicated. It's much more complicated than that. And I just want to stall a little bit on, we're not going to explain it in a way that is satisfactory to an expert, but just to emphasize how old and how baked in it is to the global mobile network. It's not just roaming, right? It's connecting and disconnecting calls, or delivering SMS messages. I believe, like, how does your phone even know that it's getting a call, right? It is constantly communicating with the local tower that you're near to check if it's getting a call. And like that constant connection is SS7. And as you said, I mean, I guess, like, what is the problem with this particular technology compared to like more recent technologies that are part of the network?
Yeah. So there are lots of different SS7 attacks, and there are lots of different attacks on like subsequent sort of efficiency upgrades. But the long and the short of it is that in general, SS7 does not require authentication. Like you'll log into your email and it'll be a username and password, and the email system knows that it's you. You've identified yourself and authenticated. With SS7, if you somehow get access to this network and can use this protocol, it doesn't authenticate who sent a request. So if you're a telecom and you have access, your request for information looks legitimate. If you're a spy firm or a government tapping in for surveillance purposes, your request looks legitimate as well. That is just sort of the fundamental issue here. And on the age thing, it's just authentication and security just wasn't a concern at the time that this was made.
Right, and it's not encrypted either, right? The communication is not encrypted either, which, if you were building something like this today, I think people would probably want it encrypted. So it exists for many decades. When do we first figure out that it's a problem? When does the world learn that there's like an issue here?
Yeah, it's broadly around sort of the 2014 mark. There's like some Washington Post coverage about surveillance companies or governments which are advertising and potentially using this service. And then there's like a really first big piece of research at Chaos Communications Congress. I haven't been there in a few years, but this is the German hacking conference. It was in Hamburg for a long time, then it moved to Leipzig, and now I think it might be back in Hamburg. I really do need to go back, but it's always at Christmas, and I'm too tired, man. Like, please. At least the American hackers pull it in the summer in Vegas, and you're like, well, I'm going to be hot anyway, so I might as well just go to the desert. But there's some researchers there, one called Tobias Engel, and they present basically like, hey, this thing can be exploited. It can be leveraged for surveillance purposes. There's another researcher around the same sort of time called Carson Knoll. I know him very well, spoken to him many times for many articles about SS7 and sort of other issues over the years. And what he does around that time is that with consent, he uses SS7 to get the text message of a German senator, which I guess I've never really thought about this, but those sorts of stunts must have been an inspiration for some of the stuff that we end up doing, where we always like, oh, with that only fake neural network fake ID service, well, let's just try it out. Let's like demo it and see if it's possible. So he did that, and very much that hacker sort of ethos. A couple of years later, in 2016, 60 Minutes in the US did something else with Carson Knoll, and they intercepted the messages of is it Ted Lieu? I can't remember, the senator, right? And they basically did the same experiment, and that sort of blew up this issue. So people finally knew about it. But that was like 10 years ago, and we're still talking about this issue.
Right. I think that it is, just to go back a little bit to what Emmanuel was saying.
Sure.
It is really hard to explain what SS7 is to readers and to people who ask about it. And yet it is so incredibly important and such a massive vulnerability in our cell networks that essentially can allow for the tracking and interception of people, sometimes the interception of messages. There was a story that we did at Motherboard where we got like a leaked document about SS7 and we wanted to publish it. And I remember that we had to get it legaled. So we had to talk to our lawyer. and trying to explain SS7 to our lawyer to like convince him that it was sufficiently important to take a legal risk with sort of to publish the whole document was
that the lobbying
crazy.
document I got?
Yeah. I think we did publish it ultimately, and
yes.
we don't need to get into the nuts and bolts of what the specific document was, but it was lobbying around SS7 insecurities and so on and so forth. And it was telecom lobbying, was it?
Yes, it was the telecom industry saying it's all okay, there's no issue here. It's basically the TLDR.
Yeah. And I believe we did publish the full document, but trying to explain why we needed to publish the full document versus sort of just paraphrasing it because it was something that was leaked to us. It was like maybe it was copyrighted in such a way. Like there were concerns, not major concerns, but it was like, this is so complicated that people need to see the exact language and exactly what we're talking about in order to portray like the importance of this, essentially.
Emmanuel, were you going to say something?
I want to talk about around 2014 to 2016, we learned that this is a huge issue. And I want to talk about specific examples of how this is being abused. But I think before we get to that, can we first talk about how it's being abused, like what people are actually doing? Because when we talk about hacking all the time, or what people imagine because of the movies is like you crack a password, or you find some technical flaw, or you do some sort of like computer wizardry and like you defeat a security system. But what people are doing is more mundane than that. It's actually working through the bureaucracy of networks to execute these attacks. So it's like how they do it, and then let's talk about some of the use cases.
Yeah, that's fair. So the way they do this is, as you say, it's not really by hacking, that sort of thing. What they need is they need to get access to the SS7 network in some form. And there's a couple of ways of doing that. The first is that they can lease access to a global title. And this is like, you're a company, you own a global title. This gives you the ability to like route and receive messages, essentially. I actually, at one point, when I was back at the Daily Beast, that media outlet, I posed as an SMS routing company to see if I could be offered a global title. I mean, it was kind of undercover, not really. Like, I wouldn't give myself too much credit, but like I bought a domain called smsrouter.co or something. And then I went and I posed as a potential customer to a telecom that I had heard was involved in SS7 attacks. And after a few emails, they offered it to me for like $2,000. Now, that was not enough to go for me to start doing SS7 attacks. It's very complicated after that, lots of technical stuff. But you need that initial access, and you could do it that way, and then you go and figure out your code and your commands and all that. The other way to do it, and this is what some of the spy firms have been doing, especially like the Israeli ones, one called Rayzone Group, they basically run or acquire their own companies in the telecommunications space. So rather than creating their own or just tapping into the network, they become, quote unquote, like a legitimate player, which is again part of the problem, because in the eyes of SS7, everyone is a legitimate player, even if you are a spy firm that's then selling it to governments. So that's how these entities gain access. And then once they're in there, there's basically 4 different ways it's used. I mean, this probably isn't fully accurate. I'm sure there might be like 1 or 2 more, but like these are the ones that jump out to me. And the first one is that it's going to be used in espionage, right? I think there was some recent reporting, or maybe not so recent, that there was suspicious SS7 activity before the OPM hack that China did against the US. There was that sort of thing. The example I have here in our document is that in April 2014, over 3 days, Ukrainian mobile subscribers, they received suspicious-looking SS7 packets coming from Russian telecoms. And I think that's just the key thing to stress, is that you may be a telecom in Russia and you gain access to SS7. that doesn't mean you can just spy on phones in Russia or Belarus or Ukraine. Technically, you could probably do it worldwide, some specifics pending. But the whole point is that once you're in SS7, it's a worldwide capability if there aren't other protections in place. And I think that's what makes it so scary. It's been used in war, the much more recent conflict. Ukraine suspended all inbound roamers, that is people, I guess not people, all packets coming from Russian and telecoms from Belarus as well from being in Ukraine. So that was a way to stop it, showing it has great importance in war. Used to deliver malware. We'll talk about this a little bit more in the second story, but it's not just for tracking location or intercepting text. You can push potentially code to a phone and infect somebody that way. And then I think the one I really want to talk about in a little bit more detail, because I remember reporting this, it blew me away. Nobody's really reported on this since, and I think it's still happening, and it's underground and very interesting, is that this isn't just for governments and spy firms, it is for financial criminals as well. And when we were at Motherboard, I confirmed that a specific bank, which was the Metro Bank in the UK, don't expect any of you to have heard of this very small bank. Don't worry about it, okay? Some of their customers were targeted with SS7 to intercept 2FA codes, which you would use to log in and then empty their bank accounts. The defensive arm of GCHQ confirmed it to me after I got the tip. The bank confirmed it as well. I think other banks or telecoms told me they're like generally aware of the issue, which really, really blew me away because, well, for a couple of reasons. It shows that it applies actually to normal people as well, not just the targets of governments. But for years, we had always seen these stupid websites come up on the dark web that were like, oh, I'm selling SS7 interception technology. Send me $5,000 in Bitcoin and you can do this. And they were all bullshit. Like nothing ever came of it as far as we know. This was confirmation that, oh my God, the hackers have it, the cyber criminals have it. And I haven't really seen any reporting of this since, at least in any sort of big way. But I'm sure that this is still going on. Emmanuel, do any of those use cases that I just mentioned like jump out to you as particularly worrying? Or,
I mean, I think what's fascinating is that it is both location and just like the content of text messages. I mean, I think we've talked about 2FA not being the perfect system that people think it is, but the fact that like this one very old part of the network is used to both like grab the code you need to log into your bank, but then also can use the cell phone towers around you to like give away your exact position is just like very scary. Which I guess is why you see all the private like spying firms building tools for this, of which you've listed a bunch here for me. And you said at one point one of these contacted you? And
yeah.
But how did that happen?
Yeah, so I wrote another piece for the Daily Beast that basically I did a survey of like the SS7 industry in a way, and I just found a bunch of companies that advertise this technology and then wrote an article about it. And then one of them contacted me, and I presume it was over like one of my internet numbers, because some people will know, like I don't use a normal mobile phone, and I'm pretty sure I wasn't using one at this point. They call me up and they're like, hey, you wrote an article about my company. Yeah, I'm the guy that sells SS7 to like the highest bidder. Like being a little bit sarcastic, but also like I think a bit annoyed. And it sounded like there was a barbecue or something. I seem to remember there was like a lot of noise in the background, like kids or food or something. And I get people ringing me up and being angry all the time, but I try to I tried to get something out of it. Was like, oh yeah, well, it's great that you reached out. Let's have an interview. Can you do now? It's like, no, we'll talk again soon or something. And then it never happened, and like I couldn't set up the interview. But to me, it solidified. Like, pretty glad I don't have a mobile phone because this guy ringing me up, being big mad, and theoretically he could geolocate any phone on the planet. And I think it would be very, very, very stupid for one of these companies to do that. But like, I did reporting back at Motherboard where an employee of NSO Group, which was, you know, a very famous government malware vendor, used the malware to spy on a love interest. Like, it's certainly not outside of the realm of possibility. It may be rare, but it happens. I just don't want to take the risk sometimes with these people. Like, I don't mind pissing them off. I just don't want to have a phone.
What do we know about how much this happens actually? Like, specifically location tracking. Like, how often is this abused?
Yes. So on one side, like, it sounds like a mass surveillance capability, and it kind of is, because you could theoretically target like a massive number of phones, depending on the network, blah, blah, blah. That being said, it's pretty loud. Like, it's not it is stealthy to the end user. Like, a normal ordinary phone user is not going to be able to tell. But if you're in telecom security, governments, SS7 is not a super subtle activity. Like, it can be pretty obvious, at least from my conversations with researchers and looking at their work, that, oh, that's very suspicious. There's like a massive spike in all of these requests, like going from this telecom over here. So in that way, it is sometimes targeted because it's like shoving a battering ram through the network. So there's a talk by Cathal McDade, who works for a company that creates like the firewalls for some of these telecoms, I believe. So he has good insight into what goes on. And at some point in the talk, he said they found 150 location tracking attempts per 100,000 subscribers. So like, it's a very small percentile of the overall number of subscribers. But then, I don't know, you ramp that up to, I don't know, how many T-Mobile subscribers are there, or Verizon, or Orange in the UK, or whatever. And that's still going to be a lot of people who may be of interest and who may be targeted by this as well.
It sounds like a lot to me, considering like how much effort you have to put into like executing one of these 150 attempts. I mean, you wouldn't do this for anyone. Like, all the examples we see, it's like either you're trying to steal out of money or you're trying to find a specific person. I don't know. I think it's a lot.
Yeah. I guess I would put it like, if you have, I don't know, on one side, you have the hyper-targeted stuff, like literal NSA malware, or like stuff made by some of the companies that me and our former colleague Lorenzo Motherboard covered, like a company called Azimuth Security, where they develop like the real malware for like Five Eyes. I think that's going to be hyper-targeted. On the other end, you're going to have, I don't know, scam calls, which just affect everybody. SS7 is going to sit easily somewhere in the middle of that, if not a little bit more towards the targeted side. But yeah, I think this happens a lot more than people may realize, just because it's so complicated and nobody really talks about it, and there's so few documented cases of it as well. I guess I would say, with documented cases, maybe let's take a break, and then when we come back, we will be talking about the news that we're building up to here, that we broke recently. We'll be right back after this. All right, and we are back for the Joseph Cox podcast, where I talk about SS7. No, I'm not. This story that we broke last week at this point, cyber official speaks out, reveals mobile network attacks in the US. Basically, what this official revealed was that there have been multiple location tracking attacks on phones in the US in recent years. Jason, before I get to the specifics of what this official revealed, I think you edited this one, and I definitely remember sending you a Signal message simply saying, I've got a big SS7 story, or something along those lines.
Yeah, anytime you say my name on this podcast, it's like pop quiz, because it's so technical. So have I studied up? The answer is kind of. So as I recall, yes, you did hit us up and say like, oh, I have a really big story, which is good. And I do agree that it is a big story. It's big for two reasons. One, this CISA official, which is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Administration.
Can we have a debate on that? CISA or CISA? Or CISA? It's CISA.
I would have said CISA.
Yes, I think it's CISA. I was saying it wrong, and then I watched some talks about it where the official speaks. I'm like, oh shit, I've been saying it wrong the entire time. I think Sam's right. Yeah. Carry on.
I did get Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency correct.
I think that's because you're reading it.
I think that's because you're reading it. I am reading it now, but I wasn't reading it before.
Okay.
So it's hard to say exactly what their official position is, but they're like, their position, as I understand it, and please correct me, is not that the SS7 network is secure, but that there haven't been known attacks in recent years. And as part of a government proceeding, a high-ranking CISA official, using his own name, said that there have been high-profile, unreported attacks on SS7 in recent years. So essentially, one, the news that there is, or that we believe that there are SS7 attacks in the United States is big news. And then separately, it is also big news that this high-ranking official is speaking out about it, seemingly without permission from CISA itself, and in contradiction of its public position, more or less. And there's some nuance there, but that's like more or less what happened.
Yeah, I think that's right. And just specifically what the official called Kevin Briggs revealed, as you said, this was like an official proceeding from the Federal Communications Commission, where they put out a public request for comment, where they're like, we're looking into SS7 security issues. If you're, a stakeholder in this issue, please reply and give us information. And then there's all these replies from the telcos saying basically, it's all good, don't worry about it, like chill. And then you have the industry representatives saying the same. CISA did not provide a response, like at least officially. And then you have this one from Kevin Briggs, and we'll get into who he is in a minute. But when it comes to the actual report, he says, I believe there have been numerous incidents of successful, unauthorized attempts to access the network user location data of communications service providers operating in the USA using SS7 and or diameter exploits. Diameter is basically like an efficiency upgrade to SS7, but despite what the industry says, we're like, oh, it's much more secure. Not necessarily. According to stuff I've read online from telecommunications experts, it's much more about efficiency, where because it's purely IP, internet protocol based, like it actually can be more vulnerable than SS7 in some ways. But anyway, Briggs goes on to say that there was exploitation of a tracking of the person in the US in March 2022, then another 3 subscribers in April 2022, and then also saw a very large number of violations, several thousand, in May of 2022, which could signify some other attacks. And then they also say he's aware of exploits where SS7 is used to deliver malware, that sort of thing. He doesn't say that has happened in the US. He just says like there's something else going on there as well. But you said this was important because Briggs seemingly did that without the approval of his agency. So I see this response on the FCC website. There's no affiliation. Very strange. I start Googling Kevin Briggs. Excuse me. I start Googling Kevin Briggs SS7 because who the hell is this guy? And you find videos and reports where he's actually a telecommunications expert inside CISA. And he is described as a senior advisor for telecommunications program lead at one point. He had another title earlier than that. He gave talks about 5G, mobile security, SS7. He's also apparently an expert on EMP, which is pretty interesting. And he's basically been warning about SS7 through various forums for years and years and years. I eventually learned from the office of Senator Ron Wyden that Briggs has actually briefed his office about SS7 issues. So, reading between the lines a little bit, when the senator would get a briefing and it would just say from a DHS official or a CISA official or whatever, Briggs is the guy, basically. So very reputable, seems to know what he's talking about. With that information, I go to CISA and I'm like, did this person like speak with your approval? And they say, excuse me, I'm going to mark that because I'm breaking up, I'm crying. It's actually because I need water. SS7 just makes me cry. Where the fuck was I? Oh yeah. I contact CISA and they say essentially that he did not speak in his official capacity, which in other words is like, no, he is not speaking on our behalf. He's speaking with his through his personal opinion, which is crazy. I have never seen an official do this, basically coming out and breaking ranks from their agency and not doing it.
Never.
Well, I mean, can you think of a case? I don't know. Like,
well, Edward Snowden, et cetera. Dude, they quit though.
Forgot about him. I know what you're talking about.
Can we talk about how we, like the debate we had about the headline here, about the specific thing that you're describing and the comparison to Snowden? Because it's a very strange situation where you said broke rank right now when you were talking, which is one way we thought about describing this. And then I think not outlandish for us to bring up the possibility of saying going rogue, right? We were like, this guy has gone rogue, but then that sounded maybe like overstating the case, right? Because then that does evoke like a Snowden situation where somebody flies to a different country and like calls out his agency and breaks the law. And we landed on speaks out, but it's like we're trying to describe a situation where an informed, read-in individual is saying something his agency will not, but the agency is like, we know, we're aware, but it seems like he's cool. It's a very strange dynamic. That,
and not fired. Like, I asked CISA as well, can you just confirm his like title and whether he's still with an agency? And they confirmed the title and said, yes, he's still here, which is very different to a Snowden situation, obviously.
Which also, it means it's not defamatory, obviously. It's not an offense worth firing him over. It doesn't even sound like they necessarily disagree. I guess we don't know, but it's just like, yes, he said this. He didn't say it as an official. Yes, he continues to work here. Very strange situation.
Yeah, it was weird, and it was genuinely hard to get the headline, but I think we got the right balance because we combined speaks out with reveal, which I think gets across the complicated non-whistleblower, but also revealing something nature of it all. And I think just to wrap it up on the SS7 bit, the takeaway is that SS7, we've known about these issues for decades at this point. The telecom industry knows about them. It says it is taking all these precautions to stop it. They may not be doing enough, I think some people would argue, because then these issues can still happen, not just around the world, but on phones inside the United States in some way. And you can do a haphazard sort of Swiss cheese model of, well, we'll plug this hole with this telecom, but it's such a fundamental issue that this could persist for a very, very long time. And if you're a crazy person like me who just doesn't own a phone, that could be a solution for you, although I wouldn't recommend it because it's completely impractical. All right, let's leave that there. If you are listening to the free version of the podcast, I'll now play us out. But if you're a subscriber, we're going to talk about how the law enforcement contracting giant Axon has introduced chat GPT-like AI into generating police reports of body cam footage. This was reported recently, and then we got some more information and just published that. You can subscribe and gain access to that content at 404media.co. We'll be right back after this. As a reminder, 404 Media is journalist-founded and supported by subscribers. If you wish to subscribe to 404 Media and directly support our work, please go to 404media.co. You'll get unlimited access to our articles and an ad-free version of this podcast. You'll also get to listen to the subscribers-only section, where we talk about a bonus story each week. Another way to support us is by leaving a 5-star rating and review for the podcast. That stuff really helps us out. And tell a friend about it. Why not? This has been 404 Media. We will see you again next week.